welcome to Ake Art and Books Festival. I'm very delighted to be in conversation with Tope and Folarin. How are you this morning?
I'm well.
Let me turn that on just there.
I'm well, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's just jump straight into it.
Sounds good.
Okay. So far, this has been published to a lot of glowing reviews. We're just having a conversation about how it's been doing so far.
Yeah.
And described by the New York's Times book review as wild, vulnerable, lived, and a study of self. How would you describe the book in your own words?
That's always a difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I think it's a book that's obsessed with memory and identity construction in particular. It's funny, when I started writing this book around the time I came to Ake for the first time, and maybe about a year after Ake, I had a finished draft, a finished version, something that I was pretty happy with. And my agent sent it around to a bunch of publishers in New York. And I was targeting two editors that I really admired, and one of those editors got back to me, somebody who has published many books that I love, and somebody who has a lot of stature in the industry. And this person wrote back almost immediately and said, I love the book, but I think you should focus on the father character, because the father character is an immigrant, and I think we could build something really beautiful. And then she dangled, some money in my face. And of course, I mean, if you're in the struggle of trying to make it as an artist, you spend a lot of time hoping for that moment, hoping that somebody you respect will look in your direction and give you that offer. But I wanted to write a book about somebody who's reckoning with themselves and is trying to come up with a definition of self. And I knew that if I did the novel that she wanted me to do, that I would be betraying what I had intended to do at the outset. And so, so that's why, the reason I'm saying this is because I think a really important part of the book is about somebody who's trying to come up with a sense of self in an environment where that is very difficult, where there isn't anyone else around him who resembles him or who can provide him with a pathway to that. So that's the reason why I ultimately decided not to go with that house. And I kind of stayed in the wilderness for 2 more years until there was a publisher, and an editor, I should say, who saw the manuscript and loved it. So yeah, I suppose in the end, maybe the most important theme is identity construction.
I would agree with that. There's a lot that's centered around that. And even though Tunde Akinola is the main character, you still get, the story is so layered, you still get a sense of the father, right? And all the trauma he has to go through and dealing with race and racism. But to give the audience a bit of an idea, so this book is about the Aquino Laws, if I can say so. So it's an immigrant family from Nigeria, and then they have 2 kids, and they're in Utah, and they're pretty much the only black family there, and so they're dealing with the idea of being black, and they're not dealing with it, they're struggling with it actually, and it tends to tear their family apart. So I'm going to let you read, and we can take the conversation from there.
Sounds good.
Okay.
So I've been to more than my fair share of readings, and somebody always reads from the middle of the book and they provide 2 minutes of explanation. So my approach is just to read from the beginning, and then whatever happens, happens. So I'll just start from the top. She told me I could serve her in heaven. She accompanied me to school each day. School was about a mile away and a few hundred feet into my trek. Just as my family's apartment building drifted out of view behind me, she would appear at my side. I don't remember how she looked. Memory often summons a generic figure in her place, an elderly white woman with frizzled gray hair, slightly bent over, a smile featuring an assortment of gaps and silver linings. I do remember her touch, however. It felt cool and papery, disarmingly comfortable on the hottest days of fall. She would often pat my head as we walked together, and a penetrating silence would cancel the morning sounds around us. I felt comfortable, protected somehow in her presence. She never walked all the way to school with me, but her parting words were always the same. Remember, if you are a good boy here on earth, you can serve me in heaven. I was 5 years old. Her words sounded magical to me, vast and alluring. I didn't know her. I barely knew her name, but the offer she held out to me each morning seemed far too generous to dismiss lightly. In class, I would think about what servitude in heaven would be like. I imagined myself carrying buckets of water for her on streets of gold, rubbing her feet as angels sang praises in the background. I imagined that I'd have my own heavenly shack. I'd have time to do my own personal heavenly things as well. How else would I get to heaven? One day I told my father about her offer. We were talking about heaven, a favorite subject of his, and I mentioned that I already had a place there. I've already found someone to serve, I said. What do you mean? My father smiled warmly at me. I felt his love. I repeated myself, Daddy, I'm going to heaven. And how are you going to get there? I told him about the old lady, my heavenly shack, the streets of gold. My father stared at me a moment, grief and sadness surging briefly to the surface of his face, and then anger. He leaned forward, stared into my eyes. Listen to me now. The only person you will serve in heaven is God. You will serve no one else. My father has told me many times that he settled in Utah because he didn't want to be where anyone else was. His cousins and siblings had left Nigeria for Athens, London, Rome, New York City, and Houston. My father wanted to be an American, but he also craved isolation, so he decided he would travel to a city in America he knew nothing about. He left Nigeria in 1979 after a school in Utah, Weber State University, offered him a place in its mechanical engineering program. His bride, my mother, accompanied him. They arrived in a country that bore little resemblance to the country they expected. My father, a devout fan of television shows like Gunsmoke and Bonanza, was disappointed when he discovered that cowboy hats were no longer in style, and he sadly stowed his first American purchase, a brown 10-gallon hat that he brought during a layover in Houston, in his suitcase and under his bed. Mom arrived in America expecting peace and love. She had fallen for the music of the Beatles and the Beach Boys as a high school student in Lagos while listening to the records that her businessman father brought back from his trips abroad. Though she had imagined a country where love conquered all, where black people and white people lived together in peace and harmony, Mom and Dad arrived instead in a place where there were no other black people for miles around, a place dominated by a religion they never heard of before. But this was America, and they were in love. They moved into a small apartment in Ogden, Utah, and started a family. I came first in 1981, and my brother followed in 1983. Dad attended his classes during the day while Mom took care of us at home. She occasionally explored the city while pushing my brother and me along in a double stroller. Soon enough, we were all walking hand in hand. At night, my parents held each other close and spoke their dreams into existence. They would have more children. My father would start a business. They would become wealthy. They would send their children to the best schools. They would have many grandchildren. They would build their own version of paradise on a little slip of desert in a country that itself was a dream, a place that seemed impossible until they stepped off the plane, shielding the sun from their eyes, and saw for themselves the expanse of land that my father had idly pointed to on a fading map many years before. As I look back now, especially with the knowledge of what will come after, the rest of my life set in unflattering relief, I realized that my first 5 years were the most ordinary in my childhood. We moved frequently, but I can only remember joy. One of my favorite memories from this era, for some reason I'm chasing my brother around our apartment with a red crayon. When I catch him, I pin him against the wall and color each of his teeth red as he screams. My mother shrieks when she sees him. She thinks he's bleeding because of the red wax that's shining from his teeth. She laughs when I tell her that the blood isn't real, and then we all laugh, and I allow my brother to color my teeth as well. Then we color Mom's teeth. She prefers lime green. Life flowed easily until we moved to Bountiful. We settled there because my father had found a job in an auto repair shop in neighboring Layton, and Bountiful was one of the few places close by with any affordable housing. My father couldn't find a job as a mechanical engineer anywhere in northern Utah, but he knew a bit about cars and he figured he would work as a mechanic until something better came along. My mother's illness began to reveal itself to us shortly after we moved into our 2-bedroom apartment, a tiny place near the center of town with pale yellow walls and bristly carpet. Mom's voice, once quiet and reassuring, grew loud and fearsome. Her hugs, once warm and comforting, became cold and rigid. She stopped cooking for us. Sometimes my brother and I didn't eat until my father returned from work in the evening. She began to spend more time in her room, away from us. One morning, my brother shook me awake and told me that Dad was crying. I did not believe him. I didn't think such a thing was possible. We scrambled to the living room and saw Mom standing over Dad, her eyes boiling with rage. My father was naked. His clothes, now nothing more than torn rags, were arrayed haphazardly around the room. He was bleeding from a wound on his thigh, and his face was wreathed in a constellation of sweat and tears. My brother and I reached over to him, but Mom cursed at us. "Get the hell out of here!" I was terrified. I looked at Dad. His bottom lip was shaking. His teeth were red. "Yes, go," he said. "What are you waiting for? Go now." We ran. We hugged each other in the corner of our room. Moments later, my father began to scream. Over the course of the next few days, my brother and I witnessed this scene many times, my father cowering on the floor, my mother standing imperiously over him. He took her punishment whenever she descended into one of her moods, and afterward he would enter our room with a calm smile and tell us that Mom wasn't feeling like herself, but that everything would soon be okay. We tried our best to believe him. Before long, we realized the truth. After Dad left for work each morning, my mother locked herself in their room. She rarely interacted with us, but occasionally she opened the door and asked us to come inside. She asked us to stand in the corner of the room near the dresser. She pointed to various places in the room: her closet, Dad's desk, the empty space near her full-length mirror. She asked us if we saw it. "See what, Mommy? Don't you see that? What is wrong with you?" My brother and I glanced at each other. Was this a game? "Mommy, I don't see anything. Can we go now?" "No, not until you tell me what it is doing there. Tell me why it won't leave." Sometimes my brother and I lied. We made up stories about what we saw, and my mother nodded sagely. Sometimes she disagreed with us and told us to look again. This could have been fun, but the wild look in my mother's eyes unsettled us. Sometimes she told us that we had to leave before they came to get us. "Something about this place isn't right," she'd say. "Not right at all." Then she'd pull up her covers, switch on the radio, and mutter herself to sleep. I started school on September 7th, 1987, a few weeks before I turned 6. I was ecstatic because I'd spent much time watching the kids in my neighborhood trip past my bedroom window with books under their arms and bags on their backs, like they were departing for another world. I dimly sensed that at school I could become something more than a brother or son, that each day I went, I would come back carrying knowledge that was mine alone. My family walked with me to school that first day. I remember the principal extending her hand when I met her. I shyly extended mine as well, and as we shook hands, she said, it was in her eyes, the way she looked at me, like I was something scary and unknown. That's how I knew I was different. On the playground, all my classmates asked if they could touch my hair. I said okay. Then Simon rubbed my skin and ran away crying to the playground attendant. It won't come off, he wailed. Why won't it come off? I was too tired after school to ask my father any questions, too excited about everything I had just experienced. But the next day, after another kid rubbed my arm until it was raw, I asked my father why my hair was so kinky and why I couldn't wash the brown off my skin. He shook his head and frowned. He began talking about the importance of pride, the meaning of self-respect, but I didn't really understand what he was saying. As he spoke, I thought about the old lady I'd met a few hours before. That morning, Dad had hugged me at the door of our apartment and told me that I'd have to walk to school by myself because he had to work and Mom wasn't feeling well. I said okay, but I was afraid because school seemed so far away. As I walked to school, tentatively, nervously, she suddenly appeared like I dreamed her into existence. She told me her name was Mrs. Hanson and she asked me what I was doing. I told her I was walking to school. She smiled. I've never seen a little black boy around here before, she said. Where are you from? I'm from here, I said. She laughed and placed a hand on my shoulder. She spoke as we walked, and I enjoyed hearing her voice, the gentle rise and fall of it, because it somehow seemed familiar to me. She asked me questions about Dad and Mom and my brother. She told me that she'd always wanted to go to Africa, but she'd never had the chance. When we were about a block away from school, she looked into my eyes and patted my head. I enjoyed speaking with you. You are a wonderful little boy. She blinked slowly and nodded. Keep it up. Maybe one day you'll get to serve me in heaven. If you do, I promise you'll get everything you've ever wanted. The happiness I felt as I turned and ran to school, this sheer joy, is something I've been searching for ever since. Thank you.
So there's a lot in that one chapter. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
So let's start with this immigrant family that's moved to America, the land of milk and honey. Thinking that, because he went on a scholarship, right? Thinking that it was going to be fairly easy, looking for a better life for himself, his new bride, and his prospective family. And that's not really the case, because you see him hopping from job to job. And obviously he's working jobs that are way below, his grade technically, because of the way, it's socially constructed at that point. And with Mrs. Hansen, it took me till the second time it was referenced to understand what that was about, right? And understanding the historical, how do I call it? So with Utah, please correct me if wrong.
Yeah, well.
Mormonism is still a thing, right?
Absolutely.
And it was even
yeah.
more of a thing. And the relationship between race and that then, probably still now, was, if you were black, you were inferior. And so that's why even on earth, you are inferior, and then you go to heaven and you still serve them in heaven. So yeah, that was quite a lot to take in.
Yeah.
And you see in I think in the next chapter or thereafter, Mr. Aquino Laws, if I will call him that, insists on his wife walking Tunde to school, because he understands the implication of that on his son, because all he's doing through his life is trying to build him to be this better version, right? So be educated, be more successful, or be more white, so that you're more accepted in that society. Can you speak a little bit about that and what it might have been like to be situated in that? And obviously going to school and, trying to get your color robbed off of you because, brown is probably seen as dirty because everyone else is white.
Yeah, I think for Tunde's father, he brings him to a place where he thinks that the kids will be successful because they're in America. So he's not attuned to the kind of reality of inhabiting a place that doesn't have a place for you, really. I mean, the reality of living in a place like Utah, or even the United States, is that this entire system wasn't created to benefit you. And that's something that I think a lot of immigrants, perhaps, they might understand it, but they don't really come to grips with it until they arrive in a new place. And so I thought it would be important to start with this anecdote, because you're right about Mormonism. For many years, Mormons believe that they have different levels of heaven. This is basically a simple way of explaining it. And they believe that the only way that black people could get to the highest level of heaven was if they accompanied a white person, basically, as a servant, so that you would serve a white person for eternity. And Tunde's father doesn't know anything about this. And so Tunde is walking around, and from his perspective, because he's so alone and desperate, when somebody, a kind of a female figure, offers him love and says, "The love I'm offering you is to serve me for the rest of eternity," he's ecstatic about that, because it's an opportunity to be cared for by someone, and he doesn't understand the implications of what that care means. Another thing that was important to me in this first part of the book was there's a moment when Tunde's mother is abusing Tunde's father, and that's something that happens. Okay, it happens every now and then when the mother is abusive to the father, when the wife is abusive to the husband. And at one point, Tunde's father is naked. And the reason why I wrote that was because I was trying to tie that into another prevalent idea in Utah and much of the states, which is that black people have the curse of Ham, right? They have been marked for eternity. And the reason why that happened is because Ham saw Noah naked. And so and there was, the other brothers, they covered Noah in his nakedness after he'd been drunk. And so when Noah wakes up, he says, "Oh, you saw me naked, well, I'm cursing you. You'll be black." So Tunde sees his father naked at that point. And so I was trying to allude to that kind of prevalent myth in Utah and across America, and across the world, to be frank, and to talk about how that might influence Tunde's trajectory moving forward. And so I think the long and short of it is that Tunde is being acculturated in an environment that thinks of him as not only as somebody who's less than everyone else, but somebody who can never be a full human being. That's the point. And that's, I think, an experience that many people have, not only in America, but across the West. You're constantly having to argue for your own humanity. And that's an intrinsically dehumanizing experience. And that's something that Tunde is going to come to understand as the book progresses.
Yeah, and so let's touch, excuse me, let's touch on the gap that you mentioned and that female figure, right? So through his story, there's this pain which he has to deal with at the end anyway, and that's from the relationship that he has with his mom. And as you go on, you see that even his relationship with his mom is equally as abusive, and she specifically says to him that, look, we can't be friends because you remind me so much of your father. But then it's more or less a hatred for that coming to America. You know, you sold me this dream, it was going to be all right. However, this is not how it's turned out. And as a result, if I may say, she then, you know, falls ill, as we call it. And so I'm not sure how much I can give away, but as it goes on, and another woman comes into the picture, you also see this longing and this gap. And so this is a gap, one, in terms of what society is telling you about who you are. There's also a gap, you know, internally in terms of that love. And I thought it was really beautiful how silence became love. Little things became love because for him, anything at that point was a love language, because everything else that would normally be the love language was lost. And so that's probably the most beautiful expression of the relationship between him and his mother, you know, when they're coloring their teeth. It doesn't get any any better than that. And just, how do you think that incident of his mother leaving and that gap in his life played out through his life journey?
Yeah, that's a major sort of absence in his life. He loves his mother and wants the mother's love, and when she departs, he doesn't know how to construct himself. I mean, I think for many people, it's the love that you get from both parents that proves to be pivotal. But the mother's love is a very important thing. The mother who can take you up into her arms when something is happening, who can love you regardless of what's going on, who can sort of remind you that she carried you for 9 months, so you know there's nothing you can do to her. And so that's something that he chases for the entirety of his life. And his father kind of insists that you'll be fine, you're still in America, everything's going to work out okay. But Tunde doesn't know how to reckon with that. And that's part of the reason why he starts to have these conversations with his grandmother throughout the book. And in many ways, I think that relationship forms the spine of the book. You know, it's a kind of his center point in a way. But that's difficult because he's calling Nigeria in the 1980s and 90s when the phone lines are horrible, right? And so he's trying to call her. And even those expressions of love are interrupted by, you know, the fact that the line is so bad and that he can't communicate with her in a consistent manner. And so that's really and Tunde at a certain point gets to a place where he believes that he has become what his father wants him to be. His father wants him to be a particular kind of black man, a kind of black man who will be successful regardless of whatever may happen for him in the States. The black man who is well-spoken, who is incredibly smart, the kind of black man who makes white people comfortable, basically. And I think that's a really important point because I think a part of constructing yourself as a black person in the United States means inevitably, on some level, that you are constructing yourself to put white people at ease. At least, and I think that's really unfortunate, but especially for an immigrant who maybe doesn't have any sense of, you know, the cultural ramifications of moving to a place like the US. The parent will insist to the child, you know, do whatever it takes to be successful. Become as polished as you can be. You know, make sure that when you go into a certain space, that these white people will smile in your direction. The unfortunate aspect of building your identity that way, though, is that it has nothing to do with what's happening inside of you. So, you know, you're not focusing on the things that make you laugh and cry, the things that make you get up in the morning, the things that make you excited. And I think that can lead to a point of crisis, and that's what happens to Tunde in the book.
I think the pivotal point for Tunde is when he speaks to his grandma, and she says to him, do what makes you laugh and cry, do what makes you smile, and what makes you calm. You know, and you see how, I mean, so he's conflicted, one, because, you know, his father's telling him he's Nigerian. His grandmother is telling him he's Nigerian, and, you know, Nigeria is so far away, and it's not something that he's beyond their house he's interacted with. Whereas, you know, everybody else is telling you you're black, and your father is also telling you to be a particular type of black man. But then towards the end, or as it unravels, you see that even with him trying to fall into that blackness, you know, he's almost fighting that also. So there's that internal conflict from what society has shaped one, what your family has shaped for you. And I think that for a lot of us also, we find that there's a perception or a certain way that we're either brought up to be, either as a default of a value system or the environment that we grew up in, and then, you know, you're in Nigeria, and Nigeria tells you what you're meant to be, and even worse if you're a woman in Nigeria, right? You're told how to be Nigerian, then you're told how to be a woman in Nigeria, and then you're told how to be a Nigerian woman, and your life is spelled out from your career to your relationship to marriage. You know, there's just a guide to that, and it's constantly fighting against that and reconciling against. A
particular kind of Nigerian woman, right? That's my next book, if it happens. That's the next book.
So with Tunde, most part of this book is reconciling this, and you see him struggling, saying, you know, having no idea on how to be black. So I'm just going to read a quote from it, if that's okay. Can I read your work?
Please.
Yeah, okay. So he says, I had no idea how to be black. The few times I told my father how I felt, he responded the same way. He told me not to worry, that if I worked hard enough and became successful, people would want to be like me. I took solace in his words for many years. That's what his father told him. But then in so many points in the book, so from when they move from city to city, from state to state, being black is just not cool. And he just finds that he's still unusual regardless. And I mean, I don't see at any point in which he's able to actually come to a place where he's comfortable. If this story did go on, do you think that maybe at any point he would have?
I think he becomes comfortable, I think, by the end of the book, in a way. The book ends with the word home, and I think so for Tunde at a certain point, part of the book takes place when he's in college, and he kind of discovers that he decides he can no longer trust his memory, and so at a critical point in the book, he says, well, since I can no longer reliably narrate my past, I'm going to write about somebody like me in the future. I'm going to project myself or a version of me into the future. And so I think that's important because what Tunde discovers, even though he doesn't say it this way, is that art becomes important for him. He's somebody who reads a lot when he's young. And in his own way, he thinks, maybe I can write a version of myself. And I think that's important because there isn't anything else he can rely on. There isn't any kind of template that he can use to become himself. And so he has to write himself into being. And that's basically what he does. I don't think I'm giving anything away when I say that. And so maybe I am. But I think for me, it's about the importance of art. It's about the importance of when you live in a place a reality that wasn't constructed for your benefit, where there's no one you can look up to who can kind of show you the way, when you're an aberration, when you're a complete outsider. Part of my argument in the book is that maybe the pathway to kind of self-actualization is constructing that for yourself. That's, in many ways, the moral of the story, to the extent that there is a moral. So, I think he finds a sense of self and perhaps even a sense of home in that idea of himself that he's constructed at a moment of crisis.
Apart from the trauma, obviously, that comes with his childhood, could I maybe attribute this double memory that he comes to have to, this double consciousness or this two-ness he has to embrace? Is it a far-fetch, or is it?
No, I think that's absolutely connected to it. That is, I read more than my fair share of Du Bois, and so I was thinking, I think a little bit of double consciousness when I wrote that. But I was also thinking about the idea that if you are constructing a sense of self that's based on satisfying others, then your entire, we're all walking stories. When you wake up in the morning and look in the mirror, you have a story of yourself that you're confronting. And the thing about memory is that the memories that you have will begin to conform themselves to that story. So for example, I was talking to my brother maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I said, remember that time we went to the amusement park and you stole that thing from me and ran away? And he said, I never did that. What are you talking about? I said, yes, you did. And then so we both called my dad, and my dad said, that never happened. What are you talking about? And so I had to look and say, am I making this up? Are they playing a trick on me? Now, it's possible that I've constructed a story of myself in which I was a victim there for some reason. I don't know why. And he was the bully, you know? And so the thing that happened has changed in my mind. And now I'm constantly feeling victimized by him. I don't know what's going on. But, I mean, I think that happens all the time with us. You know, we construct a sense of self. And then the memories, because memories they're not reliable, right? Memories they hardly ever conform to what happened. And even if they do, they shift slightly. And the older you get, the more likely it is that your memory is shifting to accommodate the sense of self that you have. So for Tunde in the book, once he recognizes that the memories that he has were meant to support this version of himself that he no longer believes in, that no longer supports, his memories become unreliable because his story of himself has begun to fall apart. His sense of self is no longer reliable. And so part of what his mind is doing is scrambling to create a new sense of memory, a new set of memories that can support this new version of himself. And so I think that's an inevitable part of the kind of process of making yourself whole, is like examining the memories that you have that have supported this version of yourself that might not be the right version, right? So
I did mention to you that in reading this book, I did question my memory.
I'm happy.
And I think I'm going to refer to that because you just pulled a story from your own life. And something that one would wonder is how much of your story is in this story. I mean, you have other similarities. There's Utah, there's immigrant families or parents, there's Morehouse. So is it right to call this autofiction? How much of you is in it?
I'm glad you used that term because I'm really obsessed with autofiction. And I don't really believe in the distinction between fiction and nonfiction. For me, that's completely meaningless. And I know maybe that sounds crazy to certain people, but for me, and so because I believe that, I mean, fiction is the one form that is capacious enough to hold both fiction and nonfiction, right? If I write a memoir and I, kind of change some things to kind of align with the story, somebody will call me now and say, well, this didn't actually happen. Let's take all the books off. Let's destroy the books. Exactly.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not so important, that distinction. I did start it, to be perfectly honest, I started as a memoir. And as the more I wrote, the more this Tunde character, who was unnamed at the beginning, began doing things that I didn't necessarily do and had interactions with his father in particular that I had never had. My father is similar to the father character, but different in many ways. So my dad read another thing that I wrote a while back, and he called me and said, "That's not me. What are you writing this for?" And I said, it's not supposed to be you. Settle down a little. And so, but I mean, I think that's what happens when you're writing a story, is that the story has its own demands. The story has its own aspirations. The story has its own dreams. And so in order to honor that, sometimes even if you're writing based on somebody in your life, the story will take you in a different direction. So, which is a long way of saying that, yes, there are certain moments that are drawn from my life, but for me, the most important part of writing this book, again, as I've said before, was about writing how we come to be. Especially, as you mentioned, you talked about the Nigerian women experience. I'm interested, and I think it's something that we're all kind of grappling with now in the 21st century, when identity isn't tethered to kind of personhood in a way that it was before. We all have the option of creating our own identities. And so we're in this incredibly strange new place as a society, as a human race, where I can go on the internet and say, okay, like there's a community of people that I relate to in a way that I don't relate to anyone who lives around me. And so I'm going to align myself with these people. And so because we're in this new era, this new phase, I think one of the more important questions is, how do we decide to be? And what influences that decision? And so because I think that's such an important part of like living in the 21st century, that was the focus of the book for me. And so yes, I'm drawing liberally for my life, but all of it is in service of this theme and this argument that I want to make in the book.
So can I ask you how you came to be?
Wow. You went personal now. You want to start? I came to be, I think, I'm one of these people who, basketball was very important to me when I was young. I played basketball, sports in general. My dad wanted me to be the next Pele, so he set up an obstacle course in the backyard, and he had me running, and I was tripping over myself. I was so bad. I was horrible. So he was disappointed with me, but then I started playing basketball. I was very good at basketball. And so for a time, I defined myself as a basketball player. That became very important to me, and especially because Aquino Laws he was a great basketball player. in the United States, and I looked up to him because he was somebody who, had a Yoruba name and was doing well, and all of my friends loved him, and so I thought, well, maybe I can be like him. But then as I grew older, I think I started reading more and more. I'd always been a reader, and then, so I became addicted to like logic. I became a very logical person. I became obsessed with the idea that I could make my life by becoming very, very rational. And so for a time, that's what I did. But then by the time I got to grad school, I discovered that I found that position to be, that kind of lifestyle, to me seemed dry, and it seemed like I was missing something very important. So that's when I began to go to read even more, and I went to museums. I started listening to all kinds of music. And in the end, I found myself, I think, via art. I found my tribe with artists. And so that's why, even though it's very different in the book, Tuna as well finds himself via art. And I think he's too young to kind of articulate what's happening. But it was important to me to kind of show that story in the book as well, because when I started going to museums on a consistent basis when I was about, I'd say 24 or 25, and reading as many plays as I could and reading as many novels as I could, I found a sense of comfort in doing that. And I found a sense of home, if you will, as well. And so though the art provided an answer that my parents could never provide, and that society could never provide as well. And art also helped me to kind of heal myself in a way, which is something that I've been searching for a long time. So I think the short answer is art is what enabled me to find a sense of self.
I'm glad you found yourself.
Thank you, thank you.
Did you face any sort of dualism, if I can call it that, just like he did growing up in Utah?
I never had, I should say, I never had like double memories. At least I don't think so, maybe.
Well, the idea of being, American and being Nigerian, or American and being black,
Not like Tunde. If I'm being honest, I would say that when I was growing up, like just being a Nigerian was such a bad thing, when the one thing is that people would call you African booty scratcher whenever they saw your name. And so they would say all kinds of things. I remember one time I went to school, and whenever I walked past somebody, they would start yelling like a monkey. They'd go, ah, 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 ah. And I didn't know they were doing this for me. I had no idea. So I was just walking by, happy, and, ah, ah, ah. And then somebody pulled me aside, and they said, oh, they're calling you a monkey. I was devastated. I thought, wow. And I actually didn't go to school for 2 days after that because I was just so sad about that. And so I say that to say that when I was younger, I definitely tried to sprint away from my Nigerian identity. I wanted nothing to do with it. And then when my dad would come to school, he would yell at me in Yoruba very loudly, Tope, Wambi. And I was like, don't do that. What are you doing? Yeah, stop that. And so it took me a long time to embrace my Nigerian side. I think Tunde was more open to that than I was. If you go back in time and see the 7-year-old version of me, I would probably be repudiating it. I have nothing to do with that now. Yeah. But I think, again, as I grew older and as I read more, I became desperate to know more about Nigeria. And I think my parents contributed to that as well. My dad wanted us to have American accents. He wanted us to carry ourselves as American because he thought that was the key to us being successful. And so, and I saw how people treated my dad with his accent. My dad is a very bright person. He's very ambitious and driven. But he didn't achieve everything he wanted to achieve because he has this accent and people didn't take him seriously. And so I saw that when I was young as well, and I thought, well, I need this very American accent to be successful. But then I grow older, I begin to have, my own kind of crisis, and I wonder more about my Nigerian, as it were, my Nigerian side. And so that's one reason why I even go to school and I'm studying everything I can about Nigeria, and I get a graduate degree in Nigerian politics, because I'm trying to connect myself to this very important history, that my heritage, this core part of who I am. So that's my own journey, which differs in important ways between this.
That's very valid. One of the most emotional parts of the book actually was the ice cream. Should I call it saga? The ice cream bit, and so gets into the point in which, this was for the fair, right? And this was huge. And then they say this prayer, I'm literally in tears, and I get to the end, and he says to the person he's just hired, is it Jerry or someone, saying, you can't ruin this. it's not a spoiler, don't worry. You can't ruin this for me. And then you see there and, in different places in trying to get to the fair, how he thinks his accent is a disadvantage, or probably is a disadvantage for him, and him spending time with Tunde to read so he could listen to Tunde and pick up an accent from him, which I thought was quite interesting, and it's quite similar to your experience. But you trying to reconnect, or you trying to embrace more of your Nigerian self, I guess you've had to grapple with that even recently. So with the Kane Prize, and being questioned in 2013 as to whether your story, Miracle, really qualified for it. How African you are, or how African the story is, considering that you weren't on the continent. First of all, obviously, no one wants to be questioned as to how African they are, but in reconciling, did that have any impact on you, or it's just...
Not really. I mean, I think by the time that controversy happened, I was ready for the controversy. I was ready to kind of answer those questions. If it had happened 5 or 10 years before, I would have been, I'm sure, in my room, just in a ball, listening to Adele or something. But but by the time it happened, I was ready for it. I was like, whatever. And I think in many ways, my entire life had been preparing me for that moment. I have been at the center of some of those questions for a long time. I mean, in America, they'll, am I American enough because I have this Nigerian name, and my parents are from Nigeria. And so I think, the great thing about that experience was that it was, I think the story itself kind of embodied what I was trying to say. The story, Miracle, is a diasporic story. It's a story that takes place somewhere else. But it's a story about a group of people who are trying to create Nigeria elsewhere, right? And so, and that's a reality, and that's happening even at this moment in many parts of the world right now. There are people who miss Nigeria or miss some other part of Africa desperately, and are trying in their own way to create home in the abroad. And so I'm glad that story was a story that kind of touched this, that inspired this controversy. And I'm glad, too, that I was in a position where I could talk about my experience, because the one thing that happens is that there were a couple people, maybe more than a couple people, who came up to me and said, well, I'm not sure if you actually deserve this because you were born and raised in America. And I could say in response, I had no control over where I was born. It's not as if I was in the womb sort of begging them to take me to Nigeria or something. I was born where I was born. And when I was growing up, I have no control over that either. And so, but my parents invested in me a lot of their love of Nigeria. And I grew up eating Nigerian food. I grew up being yelled at in Yoruba all the time, sort of being called all kinds of names. So I know that experience. And I think that that my experience is an experience that many people have. So I'm happy to be, near the front of the line of people who's kind of talking about this experience. And the other side of it, too, is that during that time, I received a number of emails and DMs from people who said, I'm living a similar experience, and I'm struggling with my own identity, and I'm trying to embrace, this kind of Nigerian part of myself, or South African part of myself, or Zimbabwean part of myself. And I think that I now have a pathway to do so. So I'm glad that I was in a place where I could have those conversations and defend myself without feeling as if I was being undermined somehow by that entire process.
Fantastic. So still there, what's so beautiful to see with, I keep calling him Mr. Keanu, is his vulnerability with his children. So in the initial, when their mom leaves and telling them every day that he loves them, it's a very different way to portray a Nigerian father. Okay, let me not do that to my dad. I don't know if he's here. But it's a very different way to portray a Nigerian father and a Nigerian father with his boys. Right, and I thought that was very beautiful, very well done. And also, as it goes along, and the stories he shares with them, through their ice cream runs and all of that. For you to write that, did you go for a searching with your dad, or did you have to dig deep within yourself to be able to put that forward?
Yeah, I think that it's a good question, because so I think two things. One is that I think the fact my dad is a very Nigerian, hyper-masculine person. Let's be honest. That's who he is. He's the kind of person who, if he doesn't get the biggest meat for dinner, he's upset. And he said, "Give me your meat now." He put my meat on his plate. So that's the kind of person my dad is. But I think in America, it does kind of force a certain vulnerability on you, because Whereas in Nigeria, you can be that kind of hyper-masculine person and people respect it. There is no kind of respect happening in America. And you're constantly undermined wherever you go. People will laugh in your face or they'll chuckle when you turn away. And so I think that inspires the kind of, maybe you kind of lose some confidence. Maybe you don't feel as strong in your masculinity as you would otherwise. And I think my father experienced that. And I think we benefited immensely from seeing that side of my dad. And the other thing about my dad was that my dad would never hesitate to say that he loved us. He said it multiple times a day. He would just shower us. I mean, even I talked to him 2 nights ago, and he said, "I want you to know I love you more than anything." He's never been shy about that. And so I think that benefited me immensely, when I was growing up, because that was the foundation that I had, that my father cared about me. And that even if he had sometimes a very odd way of showing it, that I knew that he was always there for me. And so I think those personality traits inspired the father in the book. But I would say the father in the book is angrier than my father is. My father does get angry, but never for a long period of time. And so, again, in order to honor the story, I had to take it into a different direction. But yeah, he certainly is the kind of basis, the foundation for the character in the book as well.
Okay, great. We've only got about 2 minutes. So the last thing I want to touch on is your style of writing. If you have a style of writing, would you say you have a style of writing?
I think style is very important to me. I care deeply about prose, and I care about beauty and language. I mean, I'm the kind of person who if I read a beautiful book, I care much more. I don't care that much about plot. I really don't. And so it takes me a lot to kind of think about plot or focus on that. But and I say this as somebody who my major aspiration, maybe I'd say 6 or 7 years ago, was to be a poet. Right. And so I spent like a year trying to get a poem published, and nobody would take any of my poems.
Did you say one?
Just one.
I'm sorry.
The funny thing is, though, after you win the Kane Prize, everybody's like, "Oh, let me publish your poems now." I said, "No, you can't have my poems."
Hey.
My poems. No. But no, I mean, so poetry is very important to me, and I spend a lot of time reading poetry, thinking about poetry, and even in writing the book, I think for me the most important thing is that it's a beautiful thing. I'm very focused on sentences. So I think, if I have a style, it's and also, James Baldwin says, you want to write a sentence that is as clean as a bone. Right. And I think for me that means it's about economical language. I'm not. I say this now and it might come back to haunt me, but I don't see myself ever writing a doorstopper. I don't see myself writing a 2,000-page novel. I myself get bored by 20 pages in, and I put it somewhere, and then I lie and say I've read it, and I start talking about it. So I don't see myself doing that, but because I'm very much the kind of, for me the sweet spot is a 250-page novel that's very clean, that's efficient, that's beautiful, that's layered. I mean, so that's my preference. Yeah. So don't make fun of me when I write my 1,000-page novel next year.
I won't read it, don't worry. I did get that infusion of poetry in it, and I found the last few pages very beautiful, exploring that relationship with Noel, particularly the page in which he just has Noel written, and those single sentence lines. I thought that was very beautiful and very well done. Also, you talk about very heavy topics, but in some way they're balanced. So I mentioned the scene on the ice cream truck, and next thing I'm laughing because I'm like, wow, this guy is so Nigerian. And then you have Shola's mom on the phone to Tunde, and she's talking about the nose, which is, you're talking about erased body, and how white people have small noses, and wondering if they can even breathe through it. And I'm there laughing and saying, until so there's a way you've beautifully balanced telling such a heavy story in which you can fall into those emotions, but also very much appreciate the humor, which I guess was something that Tunde's father would have had to pull on to survive survive Utah. And so I'm gonna ask you a question and also then throw it out there, which is a question that you ask in the book, which is, what happens after happiness?
That's a really, I wrote it because I don't know the answer. I don't know what happened. I mean, I am one of those people who, I grew up with so much, sadness and everything else that I don't fully trust happiness, so when something happens, I'm looking over my shoulder to wait for somebody to kick my butt. Exactly, I'm waiting for it. I think the thing that I'm coming to a place where I'm trying to just kind of settle in it. So even, for example, with the book, there have been some positive notices about the book, and people, I think, have responded well to it. But then there's a part of me that's waiting for some troll to come and say, well, no, to hate on me or whatever. So I have my battle. I'm ready. I'm ready for my internet war, But I think part of it is just kind of is accepting it, accepting whatever happens. And if you work really, really, really hard at something, and you, I did, I mean, I look at this book now, this book, and I see years of my life, it's like at least 6 or 7 years of my life that represented in those pages. And so I feel very happy with what I've done.
You should. It's amazing. And I think, the years that you spent in it also contribute to, because in terms of imagery, it's quite textured, and you're very much in the story. And I mean, I wouldn't have known that you'd have taken 7, 8 years, but it's worth it, And so thank you for writing such a beautiful book.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we're gonna take questions. Okay, we've got Wana.
Hi, Tope.
Hey.
Oh, sorry. My name is Wana. I'm a massive fan of the book, as you know.
Thank you.
And I have 2 questions very quickly. One of them is in looking at the style in which the character changes voice at different points, second person and third person. And I'm also, I was wondering, this idea, if those shifts in voice and tone had something to do with a connection with the sort of fragmented identity, or if it was connected to his mother's mental condition and the fear of him inheriting that. That's the first question. The second question is the fact that oftentimes writers get asked lots of questions at different festivals and different book events. And I wondered if there was something about the book that you never get asked about that you would like to talk about.
Wow. So the first question, so what happened was when I sold the book, Miracle, which won the Kane Prize, was part of the book. And so then I was writing with Miracle, and then I pulled it out, and my publisher was mad. They're like, are you serious? There's no Miracle? What kind of book do you have now? But Miracle was important to me because when I wrote Miracle, it starts in what's called a first-person plural voice, the we voice. It starts in we did this, we did that, and then it goes to I. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to tell a story structurally as well as in terms of plot. So the structural story resembles the plot story. And that inspired this book as well. And so I started in, I don't want to get too technical, but I started in first-person past tense, which is the typical kind of memoir mode. I did this, I did that. And that's because Tunde is telling his life. But then when he begins to have a crisis, when he begins to question himself, he looks in the mirror, and then the you voice comes in. He's talking to himself in a really sort of literal way. And then when he begins to question his memory, when he begins to question whether he is who he actually is, he kind of disassociates, as many people do when they're struggling. And so that's when the third person voice comes in. He kind of writes about himself from a distance. And so I wanted the structure of the book to resemble the plot of the book. And because as the character tries to find himself, the book tries to find itself as well. The book is on a journey to settle into itself. And even the last part of the book, I love hip-hop, I love sampling, and in the last chapter, I sample lots from earlier. I explicitly cut and paste from earlier parts of the book, because part of the point I'm trying to make is that Tunde finds a new whole, but that new whole is composed of prior parts of himself, like the book is composed of prior parts of itself. And so that's why that structural piece was very important to me. And for me, the first thing I think about when I start to write is structure before I think about anything else. Second question about a question that no one's asked. I think I think the first question, nobody ever asked me about structure, and I'm so obsessed with structure. And I was the nerd who I would go on YouTube and I'd watch for hours people talk about structure. I love structure. I love architecture as well. So whenever I go to a new place, I always try to check out the great buildings. And so for me, the structure is everything, and I want to tell a story structurally before I tell a story via plot. So thank you.
Any other questions? I know you do.
I answered everything in my stuff. I'm sure there's some. Cool.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ake.
Appreciate it. Thank you.